On this edition of A-10 Hoops Talk, we're going to explore the traditions and rivalries in the Atlantic 10. From brothers that both coached in the A-10 to the toughest venues and even a pep band rivalry. All this and more on A-10 Hoops Talk Beyond the Paint, starting right now. Welcome to A-10 Hoops Talk Beyond the Paint. I'm Tom McCarthy, and I'm joined by former St. Joseph's head coach Phil Martelli. Today, we're going to talk about bands, we're going to talk about venues, we're going to talk about rivalries. College basketball and rivalries, Phil, there's nothing better.
Nothing better when you go out there and it's like playing wiffle ball in your backyard against your brother, and that will be apropos as we go into one of these segments. Playing stickball, playing flag football, well, probably tackle football. You know, I went for your flag, but I didn't get it.
Right.
But it's a different level of competitive instinct that kicks in.
Oh, you talked about backyard football. You talked about flag football. So this is a good place to start. We've got the brothers that have both coached in this league. Archie Miller and Sean Miller. Sean, now the head coach at Xavier, who was in the league for a long time, and Archie, the head coach at Rhode Island, who also coached at Dayton. Do you guys feel that a little bit, that rivalry that Phil was just talking about, that backyard wiffle ball, football, basketball rivalries that you guys had? Sean, I'll ask you that first.
Arch and I, we have a kind of a unique relationship in that he's 10 years younger than me. You think about when I'm 18 leaving the house, he's 8. When I'm 23 and leaving college, he's coming right into middle school into high school. So because of that, I don't know if we had that, competitiveness. We certainly, support each other and are great friends.
The age gap was always looking, up. As far as I can remember, college player at Pitt, I was in grade school. Out of college, I was entering middle. And then as his coaching career took off, then I started to become high school player under my dad. So Sean kind of understands a little bit of that dynamic as we were, growing up and getting older. But it's never really been adversaries. It's always been more of a, look up to, vice for, whatever it may seem, but never really adversaries.
Well, we're talking about rivalries in the Atlantic 10, and you guys coached against each other, Sean and Phil. Give us an idea, Sean. I know you're in the Big East now, but what you remember about A-10 rivalries? And Arch, I'll ask you the same thing, because obviously at Rhode Island and at Dayton previously, you understand that as well. But Sean, give us a little idea on that.
Well, I think for me, looking back at the Atlantic 10, number one is, I thought it was an incredible league. I learned so much when you're a younger coach in that league. I don't think there's a better training grounds to become a better coach, to learn the game, to learn what true competition is. When I think of the Atlantic 10, I think of Philly. I think about how tough it was to go into Philly to beat any of those teams, especially Temple and St. Joe's. And just the other part of it is, I believe the A-10 has always had a healthy chip on its shoulder. I think there's a competitive spirit in the Atlantic 10 that was unlike any place that I've been.
Arch, what about you? I mean, Dayton, Rhode Island, you've seen it on two different levels.
Yeah, my initial entry into the league, Xavier was still in the league. So, at that point in time, University of Dayton versus Xavier was, the game. I mean, that was, part of what the Atlantic 10 and part of what Dayton's makeup was at the time was trying to compete against Xavier. And that game is as intense as any game that you'll be in either side. There's a lot riding on that game. So that was one thing early in my career as I got to Dayton was that, Xavier Dayton is in the same league. That was a big deal. That was a really, really big deal going to Cintas. I can remember my first trip into Cintas. You see all these presidents in the student section of their faces from all the different decades. I mean, hundreds of different former presidents, because that's how long it's been since Dayton had won in Cincinnati. It was like 50 years or 40 years or something like that.
I think it's 70 now.
It's like probably 70 years, yeah, I guess. And we lost two overtime games in Cintas. I mean, it seemed like every time the Dayton played at Xavier, it ended in some crazy fashion where Xavier would pull it out. But just in general, I think Sean speaks to this. Is my 9th season in the league. And the thing you're always enamored with in our league all the time is the talent. There's guys that can play anywhere in the country. And back in the day, as they got older, whether it was, DeAndre Bembry, or whether it's, Jason Love, or whether it's guys at Dayton like Kendall Pollard, as they got older, they became guys that could play against anybody. And when you played against high major teams, you were ready. I mean, you could beat them in the tournament when you played against them if you made it. You could beat them in the non-conference. Nowadays it's a little different. As everybody knows, these great players that play in the A-10, they have an opportunity to maybe leave and not stay as long. But it was always a league that, like Sean said, had a chip on its shoulder. But the players, they were vets at the end of their careers in the Atlantic 10, and they could play anywhere in the country.
I think like
description.
the term, for me, and look, I took that with me when I left Xavier and learned the hard way early on at Xavier. Like, you have to have players who have a certain level of toughness to be successful in the A-10. And Phil, you could speak on this, but I also think, like, again, because of the timing of when I was in the Atlantic 10, John Chaney's presence at Temple, what he did for the league, in the league, how much he believed in the league, who he was, how unique of a coach and person, and what he did in the NCAA tournament, and how he played like that zone and no turnovers and practice at 6 in the morning. Like, he deserves so much credit for building the Atlantic 10. And just, again, when I give you my thoughts, a lot of what I say, if you think about it, it's like, to beat Temple, to have a chance to thrive in that league that he's in, you better have a chip on your shoulder and a competitive spirit.
Well, guys, we appreciate it, and we appreciate all that you've done, for the A-10, for college basketball, and I guess we have your dad to thank for a lot of that as well. But thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks.
Good luck.
You got it.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll look at the toughest venues in the Atlantic 10, so stay tuned. Welcome back to A-10 Hoops Talk as we continue to look at some of the rivalries and traditions that make the A-10 unique. Our next guests are highly respected sports journalists that have covered the A-10 for many years. David Jablonski and Matt Vautour. Guys, thanks for joining us. Matt, you obviously went to UMass, so you've been part of this Atlantic 10 for quite a long time. David, you've covered the Flyers for quite a long time. Give me, in both of your perspectives, Matt, we'll ask you first, how much has the A-10 changed since you first started watching it?
Well, I think in some ways a lot. When you look at the different schools that have come in and out, but in some ways it's the same, because the schools that are in it are they have the same aspirations. They look at the A-10 as a place that if you build your program and get the right kids, you can win. And so I think, yes, Xavier's not there anymore, and yes, Loyola is there now. And so that's different, but at the same time, those programs are looking, I think, at the A-10 the same way and the opportunity that it presents for them.
What about you, David?
I think it's still largely the same conference. I've covered Dayton for 12 seasons now, so 2013-14 was the first time I experienced the A-10. I've been everywhere 2, 3, 4 times, sometimes 10 or 11 in the case of St. Louis or Duquesne. So I've got a sense of, who's good, who's fans are going to show up, things like that. And for the most part, those fan bases are the same. Dayton's selling out at every game. That wasn't happening when I started covering the Flyers 12 seasons ago. Loyola entered the league, so that's the biggest change. And they've got a pretty good fan base in Chicago.
Both of you have seen a lot. David, I want to start with you. The most unusual character you've seen along the path in the Atlantic 10.
The most unusual character. Well, there's certainly some unusual mascots. Can I start with the Billiken mascot? He's fun to take selfies with on the sideline. I love your hawk at St. Joe. He's got a new look these days. But I loved picking up his feathers that the old mascot used to drop at various venues. I always said I was going to build a new mascot just from those feathers, but I never got there. A lot of interesting coaches over the years. Archie Miller back in the day at Dayton, fun to watch on the sideline. He's so animated, and now at Rhode Island, a character. And there's many guys just like that.
I'll put Rick Majerus and John Chaney both pretty high up there. Both of those guys were true characters of the game, great coaches that did it like nobody else. I'm going to choose Chaney because I saw him more often. You never knew what exactly he was going to say. I remember him talking about that he did coming in and saying to wake a certain UMass player up, he wanted to take go out there and grab a bat and go after him, and he meant that affectionately. And Rick Majerus at times would come in and into the post game and talk about restaurants in Maui, and so that you never knew quite what you were getting from either one of them. But those were never games that you'd let yourself miss, because to see how they coached and then what they might say afterward.
One thought, one story that describes the Atlantic 10.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying this because you're on it, but the Jameer Nelson St. Joe's team, that team was a legit, top 10 team, a Final Four contender that season. I remember thinking those teams were special, and there were a lot of teams in the A-10 that were kind of like that, but that one I think was probably encapsulated those the best, and I loved being around those teams from a basketball standpoint.
I think I'll choose Duquesne from last year, winning the A-10 tournament out of nowhere, really breaking a long NCAA tournament drought, because there's a lot of programs like Duquesne in the A-10 that are striving to get to the NCAA tournament every year. We have the VCUs, the Daytons, the Davidsons that make it kind of regularly. You can even throw St. Bonaventure, and they've made a couple appearances recently. But for Duquesne, it's been a long time since they've gotten to March Madness, and to do it in Keith Dambrot's last year, that was a great A-10 story.
Give us an idea, guys. Your favorite venue in the A-10, David?
Well, I did write a book about the history of UD Arena that we published a year ago, so it's hard for me to choose anything other than UD Arena. I'd either go with the Siegel Center at VCU because it's always packed and has a good atmosphere, or the Riley Center at St. Bonaventure because the students, when they're there, sit right on the floor and harass the other teams, and it's got a great atmosphere. It's a hard place to win. And it's a hard place to get to and back from if you're coming from Columbus in the winter. There's always snow on the ground there.
Matt, what about you, bud?
The Riley Center would certainly cross my mind. There's not a bad seat in there to as far as watching it goes. It's the only place where you can see a friar dressed in the full brown outfit taunting a player on an opposing team, which is always entertaining. And I feel like I was always there on Ash Wednesday for games, and so there were guys with the ashes on their heads yelling at some of the players, which was funny too. But I'm going to take the Siegel Center because that was an intimidating place to go into. It's kind of bigger on the outside, and you went in there, and it was just enclosed. And they had that band that was just like some bands tried to fire up the crowd and make everybody happy. That band wanted to kill you. Never has there been a building and a playing style and a fan base and a band more closely synced, which was always fun.
Well, guys, we appreciate it. Great perspective. Really do appreciate it. Appreciate all you've done for the Atlantic 10 and for college basketball over the years. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Nice to see you.
Great insight, as always, on what makes the A-10 special. We'll be right back with more Atlantic 10 traditions and rivalries on A-10 Hoops Talk. Don't go away. Welcome back to A-10 Hoops Talk as we continue to look at some of the rivalries and traditions that make the A-10 so unique. And this next one is a great one. We have two of the most unique personalities in the league, and they come from the music world. Please welcome Dr. Michael Nickens, a.k.a. Doc Nix from the George Mason Green Machine, and Ryan Kopacci of the VCU Peppas, the Peppas. As John Rothstein says, it's life-changing. Thanks for joining us, guys. We appreciate it very much. We've been talking about rivalries and traditions and things like that. You guys are such a big part of it. Let me ask you first, Doc, and we'll get to Ryan after that. What kind of an impact do you guys think you have on the game of basketball once it gets rolling?
When we're in game and in sync with what's happening in the flow of the game, and especially when we're either needed or we're there to ride the wave of the success happening in front of us. When you're out there making the sound, putting your moves, cheering, yelling, stomping, it's an undeniable connection to the whole of what's happening in the moment. And we very much feel like we are adding a little bit to what the players are able to do on the court, but also being a strong connective conduit for everyone in the crowd to feel that they are part of the event.
What about you, Rye?
I tell the kids all the time that music is not even in the top 3 of the things that we focus on. We want to get points for our team. We want to be a 6th, 7th man. We think we're part of the team. But if we can affect the game beyond the music, that's really what our calling is.
The one thing I want both you guys to know, as an opposing coach coming in, you were not on the scouting report as a 6th man. You were at worst a 5.5. You were not dropping down to 6th man. You were a starter. There's a lot of talk today in athletics, culture, family. How have you established it, Ryan, at VCU? You have a culture. How have you established that?
Well, Coach, real quick, I remember the first time you came to the Siegel Center when we joined the A-10. And man, I can tell you, I don't think you liked us very much. And it was pretty funny. I think it was something like, turn that band down. But the culture, the culture is something, it takes care of itself, right? When you have a good culture throughout your university, from your president down to your athletic director, to your coach, to your players, and then to your spirit squads, it's so easy. It's so easy because we're all bought into the same thing. We just want to win, and we just want to help the team do better.
The best part of what bands are, especially, a school band where we are there as a service to the community, as an opportunity to build ourselves, as an opportunity to make us, we're trying to be alchemists. We're trying to bring something valuable to the community around us, to our neighborhood, to our school, to our friends. And it's all about trying to achieve and trying to imagine and then make those dreams come into something that's useful, powerful, and fun.
Coaches are creatures of habit. We have a lot of superstitions, rituals on game day. Give me your game day routine.
So the first is walking into the arena, getting there at just the right amount of time after I know they've been setting up for a while, so I can walk in and see all the buzz already happening. Then the second one was, after I'm dressed, we make sure that I have 2 matching socks on, that every part of the suit is zipped up and buttoned up the way it's supposed to be before I walk out in front of however many thousands of people. And then, smacking 5 with the same folks, saying hello to certain folks, and then getting our playlist going. And all those together lead to the way I want to feel on game day.
Ryan, what's it like in Richmond at VCU?
So I'm a little bit opposite of Doc in this regard. I am the first one there almost every time. Come in just like Doc, make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Make sure everything is prepared. Before every game, though, we pull the band in the back and we give them kind of a speech, if you will. We let them know who we're playing, why we're going to beat their brains in, and how the band is going to affect that, how we are going to make sure that we are part of the game aside from playing music. And then we go out there and, there's just a flux of energy coming out, and then it's showtime then. It's almost like a wrestling event, it's like the WWE.
Well, speaking of that, how many outfits do you guys go through, and how many do you have? Doc, what do you got?
I know for sure I have 20 suits hanging on the closet rack.
You're like Phil Martelli.
But things come up, and they'll ask for a superhero day or a Star Wars day or something. So I got to add from a pile of Halloween costumes and make a run to the Party City or whatever. So somewhere low 20s is for me.
What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I've got suits, and then I think everyone knows what happens to my suits in games.
Yep.
They, like Superman, they go flying. So usually it's about 4 to 5 outfits a game, every game.
Guys, we appreciate it, and as always, we appreciate the impact that you have on the Atlantic 10, on games, and the entire personality of an event at your particular venue. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for all you've done.
Thank you. Thank you, Coach. Thank y'all.
So great. All right, stay with us on A-10 Hoops Talk. Coach Martelli will go into overtime about the special traditions and rivalries within the Atlantic 10. Welcome back to A-10 Hoops Talk, and this is the point of the show where we kind of wrap things up when we go to our overtime segment. We've been talking about rivalries and traditions. It's time for Phil to put a little quirkiness to the rivalries and traditions.
The A-10 has had highly ranked teams, Hall of Fame coaches, forward-thinking administrators at the conference and school level, legendary players, and certainly passionate fan bases. All reasons to celebrate. All reasons that have created fond and lasting memories. There have been and will continue to be memorable games, unique champions, and national exposures that have surpassed anyone's wildest imagination. What has contributed much to the uniqueness of the Atlantic 10 has been the venues, from gyms to arenas, from civic centers to gardens, from Atlantic City to St. Louis, from cages to coliseums. The stories and memories are countless. Curry Hicks Cage to Rose Hill Gym, Cincinnati Gardens to Dayton Arena, Alumni Memorial Fieldhouse to the Palestra, Atlantic City Boardwalk to Barclays. The list goes on and on. Every single coach has been asked what is and what was the toughest place to play. The answer most will give will be politically correct. They will play to the audience they're addressing. The truth from a coach, the toughest place to play is the school where they have the best players. But throughout the years, these unique venues set the Atlantic 10 apart and give it a tradition and a legacy that is unmatched in college basketball.
And some of those places laid the groundwork for not only great programs, but as you mentioned, great players. That's it for A-10 Hoops Talk. For Phil Martelli, I'm Tom McCarthy. Until next time, so long.